Pool Guy Podcast Show. The Pool Guy Podcast Show. The Pool Guy Podcast Show. Yeah!
Hi, welcome to the Pool Guy Podcast Show. Today I'll be joined by Alicia Steffens and Brian Trink from BioLab Kick. And you may be familiar with the natural chemistry brand that's under the umbrella there of the company. And we're going to talk today about all things phosphates. So I guess I'll call this Phosphates 101 for lack of a better term. Pool Service Pro. Open a Leslie's wholesale account today and receive wholesale pricing on products you use every day. Leslie's Pool Supply offers convenient locations that are open 7 days a week. Another great benefit of opening a Leslie's wholesale account is Leslie's referral program. Get referred to a customer looking for weekly pool service. Save time and money and grow your pool service route and become a Leslie's Pro. I'm joined today by Alicia Steffens and Brian Trink of Natural Chemistry / BioLab. How are you doing today?
Good. How are you? We're glad to be
good
here.
Afternoon.
Alicia, you want to briefly introduce what you do over there, and then we'll have Brian introduce his role?
Yeah, sure. I am the director of training and education for BioLab for their pro brands, which includes our natural chemistry brands. I've been with BioLab 24 years now, kind of worked my way through a couple of different responsibilities and jobs until I found a passion for education and training, and I've been doing that for quite a while now. So it's my job to take all of our products and chemicals and programs and all that stuff and go out and teach the industry pool chemistry and pool products. So that's what I spend my time doing.
And what about you, Brian?
Yeah, sure. So Brian Trink, I work in technical services. I'm the technical services manager. I've been with Kick BioLab for 27 years. Started actually doing support for dealers and consumers with pool problems, with probably a subject matter expert in water analysis and water analysis hardware, and transitioned over to the R&D side probably 13, 14 years ago.
Of course, we're going to be talking about phosphates and phosphate removers, the importance of this, and I'll just take another angle on this. I know that many years ago, Terraco mentioned orthophosphates as being a problem that's kind of a modern problem, and that's why phosphates have emerged. Because I'm kind of old school. I'm in the era where, someone brings up phosphates back in 1990s and the 2000s. We kind of just laughed it off. Like, it's just another product that people are trying to sell us. It's not real. Maybe there's a handful of old timers that still don't believe that it's a problem. But as we know in the industry and dealing with it, phosphates are a problem, and phosphate removal is important. And why is phosphate removal important?
I'll start by saying that I get faced with those people every day that are, 20 years ago we didn't do this and pools were just fine. I always, I've coined the term negotiable and non-negotiable pool care. Non-negotiable pool care is you have to sanitize and shock and prevent algae and all that stuff. But phosphate remover is technically negotiable pool care. You can take care of a pool without removing phosphates. We've done it. We did it 20 years ago. And people still do it today. But the key to phosphate removal is you can make it a whole heck of a lot easier and more efficient to take care of pools if you do remove the phosphates. So that's why it's so important, is because you taking them out removes something that gets in your way, slows you down, hurts your water quality, makes it more difficult to keep things clear and ready for swimming. So it's just a matter of let's make it as easy as possible. And that's one of the ways that we can do that.
And the phosphate removers, what exactly does it do to remove the phosphate?
Yeah, so I can take that one if you want, Alicia. So basically, phosphates in the real world are actually pretty good in many instances, right? So when you think about pool care, phosphonates are used all the time for metal and scale control. So they serve a purpose, used in water treatment to prevent deposits and corrosion in drinking water. So it gets in the pool lots of different ways, but you want to get it out. So what most phosphate removers do, pretty much whatever your product choice would be, is it literally you're putting in something that reacts with orthophosphate to precipitate it out of solution. So by nature, it comes out of the water, so it causes cloudiness. And then it's the actual lowering of phosphate is once it's removed from the pool. So it precipitates out as a lanthanum phosphate compound. Typically, there are some other rare earth minerals you can use or metals that you can use that will lower phosphate as well. But most of the time, it's going to be a lanthanum product, precipitates out of solution, and then is trapped by the filter.
For the Pool Pro, is this a fair correlation when they have a pool that they flock with aluminum sulfate and everything kind of clumps together and drops down to the bottom? Is that kind of what the phosphate remover is doing to the phosphates in the water?
It's definitely a similar process, except for in most cases there are some flocks out there, but in most cases, instead of letting it drop and having to vacuum it out, we're using the filter to grab it. Definitely the same concept. We just make it a little easier on the Pool Pro and take some backwashing and rinsing instead of vacuuming to waste, which nobody likes to do. I don't care what they say.
There's two things I always list that I hate doing to pools. One is, well, number one would be changing sand in a filter. Number two is vacuuming a pool, just because of the process it takes to do it. So yeah. I'd much rather let the filter do the work than me to have to lug a hose out to the pool and spend the next 20 minutes vacuuming and making sure I don't send too much water out.
So is it accurate? I've been saying this a lot, so hopefully it is accurate, because I've said it many times on podcasts and everywhere, that you're eliminating one food source for algae when you're removing the phosphates. Is that an accurate kind of assessment?
It is, and I'll kind of set this up, and I'll let Brian dig in a little bit. We just finished it's been a couple of years now. We did some pretty extensive research specifically on algae for a lot of different reasons. We've launched a couple of new algicides with some new technology that Brian and his team were instrumental in getting to the market, as far as, getting it out there, getting the most efficient algicide we could. But one of the studies they did as part of that was we actually set up a study where we showed what happens when algae has all of its nutrients, and then what happens when you remove nitrates, what happens when you remove phosphates, what happens when we kind of did it as a food group type of thing. And one of the things that we found is that when you do remove phosphate from the sample, it doesn't kill the algae. I always want to be clear about that. Phosphate removers don't kill algae. Algae can survive as you minimize the amount of phosphates, but it's certainly not as robust as it could be. It's not reproducing as quickly. It's not, able to bloom in a pool as quickly. So you're definitely slowing down the process of what's happening with the algae. You still need to kill it. You still need your algicide, your chlorine, whatever it is you're using to kill it. But ultimately, by limiting the phosphate, we have some really great pictures that illustrated that. But by limiting the phosphate, you certainly can impact algae's ability to reproduce and how healthy it is.
Yeah, let me give you some scenarios here. So the new Pool Pro that not too familiar with phosphate removal, let's say he tests the pool and it's at 300 parts per billion. Now, can he just go with like a blended product like Perfect Weekly? Or does he need to remove that phosphate? It's not quite at 500 parts per billion. Does he need to remove it with a treatment? Or can he just use the maintenance dose to kind of bring it down over time? And then we'll also talk about when it's really high in the pool.
Where I would go with that is one of the things that's unique to phosphate is as you're trying to remove it from a pool, the more phosphate there is in the pool, the easier it is to remove. So when it's at really high levels, it comes out of solution very easily. It reacts with whatever your choice of phosphate remover product is. It reacts quickly, comes down real fast. When you get to the lower levels, you can still remove slowly over time, but you have to remember and think through where your sources of phosphate are coming from. Why is it increasing in your pool? Doing or adding a maintenance phosphate remover to your weekly maintenance program is a great way to keep those levels low, because it's always going to be introduced. So typically what we'd recommend is that you go with a heavier hit. Well, it's a little bit more work for cleanup, right? So you want to get the phosphate levels low and then switch to a maintenance product so that it doesn't have the chance to build. Because one of the things about phosphate is that it will continue to increase over time. You can get it to zero after treatment, but it doesn't stay there over time, because there's so many different sources of phosphate where orthophosphate can get into the water or is created in the water, one of the two ways, that you have to always want to, if you're going to try to manage the pool that way, you need to continue to use it. It doesn't substitute for using a chlorine or algicide. I love Alicia, as she mentioned earlier, the non-negotiable pool care. It doesn't replace those things. Chlorine is really good at what it does. Algicides are very specific at what they do. Phosphate removers are a way to kind of help the system stay clear or give you the right conditions for everything to work like it's supposed to.
The phosphate level at like 2,000 parts per billion. And by the way, why do we measure phosphates in parts per billion and not parts per million, which is like everything else in the industry except for phosphates? But let's say it's at 2,000 parts per billion. And I guess it's a two-part question.
As far as the measurement goes, I'm not sure why we do it that way, other than the fact that when you are talking about needing to remove and treatment, 2,000 parts per billion is 2 parts per million. And in kind of pool world, that seems like a very small number, and it's something that you don't really react to, where in reality, 2,000 parts per billion is quite a bit of phosphate that we need to get out. It sounds a little more dire when you hear it in the parts per billion. I could be wrong, Brian. Feel free to jump in.
No, I would imagine is when you look back into the I think I'm trying to remember when I think Vanson was really the first one to come out with a phosphate remover, but they measured it in parts per billion. That was the way that they chose to do it. To your point, alkalinity, chlorine levels, those are all ppm levels. Let's just think, I think it sounds like you really got to do something if it's at a part per billion level. Plus, it's easier to understand. Like, if I had a phosphate remover, I've removed 300 ppb versus 0.3 ppm, right? So it feels like, yes, what I'm adding is doing what it's supposed to.
So for that 2,000, do you use something strong to remove it, or can you use the phos-free and just keep dosing it?
We have choices in our line, quite honestly, and ultimately our goal is to be less than 125. I think is our kind of our low numbers. We want to be less than that. That's ultimately the goal. We have choices kind of across the board. So at less than 500 is kind of a low cutoff for us. At less than 500, we're perfectly happy with our Pool Perfect Max product, which is a maintenance product that's going to take out low levels every single week. We're okay kind of at that level to rely on that to do the work. You start to get up into the thousands, then we're gonna skew more towards our Phos-free Max to get it out, to take out the high levels. Phos-free Max takes a little more effort, a little more time, because it's like the Mac Daddy, the big hitter that's going to take out the most. Phos-free kind of lays right in the middle of that, but it's got such a great usage because it'll take out kind of middle of the line. If you're at 1,000 parts per billion or something along those lines, you can add phos-free. You add it to the skimmer. It doesn't cloud the water. It doesn't necessarily clog your filter. It's going to take out a big chunk of phosphate, more than your maintenance dose or your maintenance product for sure, without causing some of the extra work that the heavy hitters cause. So some of it depends on how quickly do you want to do it. Can you use the Phos-free Max, take it all out at once? You're going to have to rinse. You're going to have to get rid of the cloudiness, but you're done. Sure, you can do it that way, but other people are like, a couple rounds of phos-free, it may take a little longer, but it sure was a whole lot easier. So there's just options depending on speed and what you want to deal with as part of the process.
Yeah, and I'll add to that, one thing that isn't discussed a lot is that phosphate removers, when you add a phosphate remover, it removes more than just phosphate. So more comes out than just the orthophosphate. To your point, why choose a certain product over another? Well, we could use something like a Phos-free Max at something that's at 500 level, but the problem is that you put in that lanthanum, it's going to react with the orthophosphate and cause clouding, right? That's what it does. But that lanthanum's still in the water, so it's going to look for other things to react with, and what it can actually react with is your total alkalinity, because it will react and pull out carbonate as well. So you just don't notice as much, again, because if you think about it, when we're removing phosphate, we're at the ppb level. So 500 ppb is 0.5 ppm. But what happens is you can react with alkalinity at the same kind of level. So it will react with the carbonate in the water and actually cause that to precipitate out as well. You just don't notice it because it's removing at the ppb level, and you can't really notice that on test because you're talking it moving from 135 ppm to 131 ppm. So you don't really notice it in testing, but it removes more than just phosphate.
I always consider phosphate removers and enzymes as a chlorine enhancer. I don't know if I coined that word. I don't think I have, but I've been using it for years. I like to take credit for it, but I don't think I can. I think people get the wrong idea when you have a maintenance dose of a product. They think that you're just upselling them. It's not necessary. You have a whole form that talks about just using liquid chlorine and that's it. That's all you need. You don't need anything else but that. One of the things that I've noticed, and I did this 1 year on my route as an experiment, I just used phosphate and enzymes in every pool. I found that the chlorine held much better. The water quality, of course, was improved, and it was highly effective and also cost effective at the same time, using less chlorine, using the maintenance dose of the product. What are your thoughts on people that say maintenance doses don't really work, or I don't really need it. I can just use chlorine and that's all I need.
It goes back to the negotiable pool care concept, quite honestly. Do you need it to keep the pool clear? No, you don't need it. But from an efficiency standpoint, which is what you're referring to, we wouldn't say chlorine enhancer. That kind of taps on the door of the EPA a little bit as far as making a claim on chlorine. But we definitely call them program enhancers, because when you're doing all the right things in the non-negotiable pool care part of the world, when you add something like a maintenance dose of enzymes and phosphate removers, you are making it so that those products that you have to add, are going to be the most efficient that they possibly can be. One thing I always say about enzymes, and we can talk about enzymes here for a minute, the point of enzymes is to break down non-living organics. And that's what they do. So greases and oils and lotions and bather waste and all that stuff that gets introduced to your pool just by people using it, that gets left behind. When you put chlorine into the water, can it break down non-living organic contaminants? Sure, that's part of its job. That's part of what it can do, but it gets used up in the process. When you add enzymes on a maintenance basis, so you're going to add them every single week when you visit the pool, the enzymes go in and say, yeah, chlorine could do this, but I'm an enzyme, I can do it too. And I'm going to break that stuff down. So it'll break down the stuff that chlorine otherwise would have had to do. And chlorine's like, well, I don't have as much work to do. I'll last longer in the water simply because it doesn't have as much work to use it up. When we say enhancer, we're enhancing the overall program, because chlorine now, instead of breaking down grease and oil and suntan lotion, is able to go kill bacteria, algae, all the other things that we need it to do, which is why ultimately you say, your chlorine lasts longer in the pool. It's because it has less work to do and you're just not using it up as fast. So but maintenance levels of enzymes and phosphate removers, that's what they're aimed to do, is just take away some of the work that has to be done by your other chemicals.
I'd add to that real quick that when you talk about those, when we call them specialty chemicals, they're called that because they do a very specific job. And to be honest, in some of those areas, it does a better job than chlorine at doing it, because chlorine's very nondescript, right? It's an oxidizer, which means it oxidizes anything. It doesn't say, well, I'm specifically going to oxidize this piece. Chlorine just looks for things that it can react with. When you're talking about an enzyme or an enzyme-based product, so we'll talk about the product as a whole, because typically enzymes have a lot more to it than just the enzyme, is they're really good at cleaning surfaces and keeping surfaces clean. One of the, as you know, if you skimmer chlorination, you get that black ring that forms inside that skimmer basket. And that's because different organics get oxidized inside that skimmer by the chlorine. Well, enzyme-based products are phenomenal about making that less sticky or removing it completely on its own without having to do anything. So they definitely have a place, especially when you're talking about service and making your job easier. I'm all for finding things that make my job when I'm there easier.
There's some debate among pool pros, should we use just a pure product or blended formula? And, you guys have the blended enzyme, or you have actually triple blended formulas available. Now, what is the argument against using the blended formula? Because I know there's some pool guys that are like, I just like putting enzymes in and that's all I'm going to put in when I need them, or a phosphate remover. And the blended formulas, I personally like them because I like it. It seems easier to me to put both in, or three things in at the same time. But what are your thoughts on, that debate?
I think the perception is that when you put in a blended formula, you get a weaker version of all three. I think that's the biggest knock on doing it that way. You don't. When you put in, well, I can only speak for us, I suppose, but when you put in our blended formula, you're getting, the full effect of a phosphate remover, a maintenance phosphate remover. You're getting the full effect of the enzymes, which would be, Pool Perfect. It would be the equivalent of that. And you're getting the full effect of the clarifier that we have added in there. We've just made it easier. Instead of taking a vitamin A, a vitamin B, and a vitamin D, we put it all into a multivitamin and make it a whole lot easier to get what you need. There's no reason not to use a blended formula. You're not weakening what you get or anything along those lines. And it makes it a whole lot easier to, especially for a service guy. You don't want three things on your truck when you can carry one. Mm-hmm. And that's one of the biggest keys to it.
And I think it also adds, it depends on why are you adding the maintenance product. I mean, if you're needing something to treat an issue, such as, let's say I have really high phosphate at the time, well, then the maintenance product isn't what you want to use, because you're beyond the maintenance piece. We want to get that pool back to the place where it needs to be. So I can see a case where maybe there it doesn't make sense. But if you've already got everything under control and you're just doing what you're supposed to do as part of your maintenance to keep that water clean, keep it clear, why not use a blended maintenance product? It's less product I have to add. And at least to Alicia's point, at least speaking for what we have, is we make sure what we put in is efficacious and does what it's supposed to do.
Pool Perfect Max is a really cool, 3-in-1 product that adds enzymes, which are always paired with surfactants. And I'll let Brian talk about why we do that. But enzymes, a maintenance level of phosphate remover and a clarifier to just help keep your water as clear as it can possibly be, and all in one bottle. And you don't lose any of the effect you would get if you added separately Pool Perfect and Phosphoree and clear all at the same time. You could do the same thing, but it's all in one bottle. But Brian, you want to talk a little bit about the role of surfactants with enzymes?
Yeah. I mean, specifically, it's really they're cleaners, right? So if you look to see the types of surfactants that are used in enzyme-based products, they're really where they come to shine is at waterline and accumulations in certain areas. Because basically, the way a surfactant works is you have an end that is water-loving, and you have one that doesn't like water. So you have a hydrophobic and a hydrophilic end. And basically what it does is one end attaches to those soils and greases and oils and things that attach to the surface. And then the other side wants to pull it into the water. So it pulls things that are on the surface into the water. And then something like a blended product, you now have a clarifier that helps then take those pieces, bunch them together so that the filter can remove it. So to Alicia's point, there's a synergy that occurs between all of these things, whether it's the enzyme, the surfactant, the clarifier, that all work together to get a bigger, bang for your buck for the most part. You're doing more jobs than just one and only have to make one trip to the pool.
Yeah, it does make a lot of sense, and that's why I like the blended formula. So I think I'm correct. The blended formulas are better, and I'm doing it right?
It's definitely saving you less work, no doubt.
Yeah. Could you get the same impact if you religiously added all three technologies separately? Sure, you could. If somebody really wanted to do it that way, but we all know how it goes. When you run out of one, you cut a corner, whatever. This way, you don't ever cut the corner, and you're getting it is. Yes, David, you're doing it right. That's the short answer.
And I guess I can end this segment with the fact that if you look at the reviews, I mean, if you want to go somewhere kind of independent, Amazon is where I go. Even if I'm not buying it on Amazon, I'll look there. And all the blended formulas seem to be getting almost 5-star reviews across the board. So that to me is a good indicator that they're effective. Otherwise, you'd be like at 2.5 or 3 stars. And so the reviews, I think, show the effectiveness.
It's one of those things where you only notice when it's not working. You know what I mean? Like, it's like, I'm not really sure it's working, but my pool looks great. And then you stop adding it, and all of a sudden your water is not as clear as it could be. You start to struggle with some things. So you only notice when it's not working. So, but yes, the blended products are, our Pool Perfect Max is one of the best products that we offer, I think. And it's just really, really good technology to make things easier and more efficient.
And Alicia and Brian stuck around for a couple more podcast recordings, one on cloudy water and another one on metals and pools. And you can find those on my website. If you go to swimmingpoollearning.com and you click on the podcast icon, that'll bring you to a drop-down menu of other podcasts that I have recorded. And if you're interested in the coaching program that I offer, you can learn more at poolguycoaching.com. And thank you for listening to this podcast. Have a great rest of your week, and God bless. Real quick, if you're not using pool service software, try Skimmer free for 30 days at getskimmer.com/poolguy. Again, that's getskimmer.com/poolguy. Skimmer, everything you need to run your pool service business all in one app. Pool Service Pro, open a Leslie's wholesale account today and receive wholesale pricing on products you use every day. Leslie's Pool Supply offers convenient locations that are open 7 days a week. Another great benefit of opening a Leslie's wholesale account is Leslie's referral program. Get referred to a customer looking for weekly pool service. Save time and money and grow your pool service route and become a Leslie's Pro.